This is Muhammad Hamouda, Consecutive Interpretation course. This is an introductory lecture. The outlines of this presentation is translation versus interpretation. In this section, we are going to talk about the main differences between translation and interpretation and how translation is different from interpretation. B. Types of interpretation. C. Types of consecutive interpretation. D. Uses of consecutive interpretation, accuracy, and finally, characteristics of consecutive interpreter. Okay, let's start with the first section. What are the main differences between translation and interpretation? Actually, the first main difference is that a translation is text-based. What is meant by text-based? Text-based means that the translator receives the source text in a form or a text, a written text, and he translates it and submits it in a form also in a form of a text, a written text. So translation deals with written texts. The second, while interpretation is orally based. What is meant by orally based? It is submitted in a form of a spoken language. So this is translation is a written language, while interpretation is a spoken language. And this is what is meant by text-based and orally based. The second difference is about fluency. Actually, translation involves written language, so fluency plays a minor role in the process of translation. Some translators are so excellent and they produce high quality translated texts, but when they speak, they may hesitate. They are not fluent, but still they are excellent translators. Thus, fluency is fluency plays a minor role in translation process, while interpretation fluency plays a vital role because interpretation is produced orally in a form of a spoken language, so fluency is so important. Okay. The second section is types of interpretation. Before talking about the main types of interpretation, I'd like you to see these two videos, then we can talk about types of interpretation. This is the first video which is Obama's speech at Cairo University.
تنظر بعين العداء للإسلام. كمان المتطرفين استغلوا هذه التوترات وفي صفوف قليل من المسلمين. هجمة 11 من سبتمبر واستمرار جهود هؤلاء المتطرفين لشن عمليات عنف ضد المدنيين جعلت الكثيرين ينظرون بأن الإسلام
Okay, as you see, this is simultaneous translation. That means that the interpreter listens to the speaker and interprets what he has just said without any kind of pauses. And this is called simultaneous translation. الترجمة التزامنية ما في أي pause أي وقفة. He speaks and interprets. Okay. The second type you can see to the second type is look at this video. Okay, as you see, this is consecutive interpretation. The speaker Obama here speaks, then he stops. After that, the translator or the interpreter interprets what he has just said consecutively. After finishes, the speaker Obama, says the second sentence and stops and so on and so forth. This is consecutive interpretation and it involves pauses. في عندي وقفات. On the other hand, here it is
أدى
consecutive.
إلى المزيد من عدم الثقة والخوف. وطالما أن علاقتنا
This is simultaneous يعني تزامنية. Okay. Now, okay. So types of interpretation as we have just seen in the video, in the two videos. The first one is simultaneous translation, like Obama's speech at Cairo University. He speaks and the interpreters listen to him and interprets at the same time without any kind of pauses. While in the second video, consecutive interpretation occurs when the speaker or Obama speaks and a sentence, then he stops, the interpreter interprets what he has just listened to, and when he finishes, stops, and the speaker speaks the second sentence, and so on and so forth. Actually, simultaneous translation is outside the scope of our course because two reasons. Actually consecutive interpretation is a prerequisite for learning simultaneous translation. This means that consecutive interpretation, first of all, the learners learn consecutive interpretation, then they go and learn simultaneous translation. Why? Because consecutive interpretation involves some kind of process. That means the interpreter can think quickly and choose a suitable word, a suitable vocabulary, and so on, or remember a suitable or remember a vocabulary, and thus so on. While in simultaneous translation, there is no room for remembering. It is only simultaneous, as we say. Okay. Now, historically, what is used for? Simultaneous or consecutive? Actually, consecutive interpretation doesn't involve or may not involve, most of the time, may not involve any kind of equipment. As as we have just seen in the second video, the consecutive interpreter only speaks, interprets without any kind of equipment, and he is standing and seen on the stage. While in simultaneous translation in the first video, the translator is not seen at all. Okay, he uses certain equipments like headphones. Actually, the invention of these equipments in simultaneous translation in the past, they do not exist. These equipments are not invented in the past till 1970s. So consecutive translation or consecutive interpretation is used before simultaneous translation because it doesn't need any tools, any special equipment. While simultaneous translation, when the equipments needed are invented, it is used. Okay, so simultaneous interpretations need special equipments like headphones, which have not been invented till 1970s, and thus consecutive interpretation is used first. Moving to types of consecutive interpretation. What are the types of consecutive interpretation? Actually, we have short consecutive interpretation. That means it is a sentence by sentence. The speaker speaks a sentence and stops. The interpreter renders this sentence and then stops. The speaker interprets the speaker says the second sentence and stops, and so on and so forth. So short consecutive, it is not too long. It is only few minutes, saying only one sentence and interpreting on the only one sentence. So it is literally oriented. Okay, that means the sentence is interpreted most of the time literally in short consecutive, while long consecutive, it continues from 1 minute till 20 minutes. That means that the speaker speaks 10 minutes or 20 minutes, then the consecutive interpreter interprets it consecutively, but he doesn't have enough memory to remember and memorize every word said by the speaker because he speaks too long. Thus, the interpreter relies on a glossar translation. What is meant by glossar translation? Glossar translation or gloss interpretation means that the interpreter only gives a summary of what has he just listened to. Summary only gives a summary focusing on the main ideas, and this involves using notes. What is mean? Actually, the interpreter may take notes, some notes, but he doesn't take every word as a note. No, he can, for example, take a date because this date is easily forgotten. He may take a number like a project budget, ميزانية مشروع $12,500, for example. This number can be easily forgotten. Thus, taking these numbers and these dates as notes facilitates the process of long consecutive interpretation. Okay. Also, it relies on the previous knowledge. That the interpreter may know previously the positions of certain people mentioned during speaking. Thus, he can rely into his memory and his previous knowledge and interprets immediately their position. Okay. Mm. Moving to a new issue. When is consecutive interpretation used? In the market and the trade, at the market and the trade, tourism, meeting, and social events like dinner tables. For example, if a tourist comes to our city, uh, comes to our city, uh, the consecutive interpreter may interpret to him and tells him what is the main places that he can visit in our city, and also if the tourist want to buy something as a memory, for example, as a gift to someone else, the interpreter can go with him to the market and interpret to him until he buys the gift he wants. Also, in meetings, generally in meetings, also consecutive interpretation can be used. In social events, can be used. What is more accurate, simultaneous or consecutive? Actually, consecutive interpretation is usually more accurate than simultaneous translation. Why? First of all, because the consecutive interpreter can be seen on the stage, and the interaction between the consecutive interpreter and the participants can occur. There is a kind of interaction between them. The consecutive interpreter may clarify a piece of information mentioned by the original speaker. He may meet and shake hands with the participants, and so on and so forth. So he is seen on the stage, while the simultaneous interpreter, he is not seen at all. We listen only to his voice, but we cannot see him, and the interaction thus he is absent, and he is not he is not interacting with the participants. Allows also, the second reason is that consecutive interpretation allows taking more time. Actually, imagine this situation. If we have an Arab delegation and an English delegation. Okay. Now the Arab delegation knows, or know, the members of Arab delegation know two languages, Arabic and English, while the English delegation members only know one language, which is English. Okay. Now the Arab delegation members ask for an interpreter. Why? Because actually they understand what English delegation says, but at the same time, during the consecutive interpretation, they can think and form a better reply, because there is pauses, and they have enough time to form a better reply. Okay, thus it allows taking more time. In addition, consecutive interpretation is cheaper than simultaneous interpretation in general. Now, what are the characteristics of consecutive interpretation or interpreter? Actually, first characteristic is that he should be bilingual. That means he should be knowledgeable and knows the two languages, the source language and the target language vocabulary very, very well. The second one is bicultural. He should know the two cultures, the source culture and the target culture. In this issue, bicultural, I want to tell you a short story. And by the way, it is a real story. Okay. In 1970s, there is a disagreement between USA America and Japan about or over texture import and export, or generally texture trade، يعني بتجارة اللي هو النسيج. Now, the American president visits Japan and meets the Japanese prime minister to solve this disagreement, to find solutions. At the end of discussions, long discussions, the Japanese prime minister says, "I'll do my best to handle it. I'll do my best to handle it. سأبذل قصارى جهدي بحل المشكلة." Actually, after finishing, the Japanese media announces that the discussions failed. No agreement has been reached, while the American media announces that an agreement has just been reached, and the Japanese Prime Minister agreed on the American suggestions. Okay. Now, actually, if you now we have two contradictory announcements, okay, about the same issue. Why? Actually, if you look to this phrase, I'll do my best to handle it. According to the Japanese culture, it is a polite way to end a conversation, while according to the American culture, it is a clear-cut promise to solve the problem, and the American president understands it with reference to his culture that the Japanese prime minister agrees to his suggestions, while the Japanese prime minister, he is relying on his own culture. He is polite to end and ends this conversation politely. Who is responsible for this agreement or this contradictory ideas, contradictory announcements? Actually, the interpreter, the consecutive interpreter, because he renders the sentence as literally as possible, only replaces the words, the Japanese word vocabulary with their with their equivalences in the American language without relying or clarifying the cultural differences between the two languages. So, culture plays a vital role, and the interpreter should take culture into consideration and clarifies the cultural differences and the cultural dimension in his interpretation. Thirdly, he should be knowledgeable. And finally, if you have any question, please contact me without any kind of hesitation. Thank you.